It was a chilly evening in the heart of the city. The streets were alive with the hum of cars, the chatter of people rushing home, and the occasional honk from an impatient driver. Rain drizzled down, creating little rivers along the edges of the pavement. The air smelled faintly of wet asphalt, mingling with the aroma of street food being sold at nearby stalls. In this busy scene stood a man who seemed completely out of place among the chaos, Arthur Langley. Arthur wasn't just any man. He was one of those towering figures everyone knew about but few actually met. A self-made millionaire, his name was often mentioned in newspapers and magazines. He had built his empire brick by brick, starting with nothing more than a dream and sheer determination. But all that success came at a cost. Arthur didn't have time for relationships or friendships. His world revolved around work, money, and power. People saw him as cold, distant, almost untouchable. And tonight, walking out of an expensive restaurant after another lonely dinner, he looked every bit the part, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, his umbrella shielding him from the rain. Arthur walked briskly toward his car parked a block away. His mind was already racing through tomorrow's meetings, his phone buzzing incessantly in his pocket. He barely noticed the crowd around him, the hurried pedestrians, the vendors calling out to customers, the children playing despite the weather. To Arthur, they were all background noise, irrelevant to his life. But then, something unusual happened. As he passed by a dimly lit corner, a soft voice broke through the monotony of the bustling street. "Sir, excuse me, sir." The voice was hesitant, almost shy. Arthur stopped mid-step and turned around, surprised that someone would dare address him so directly. Standing there was a young girl, no older than 12, her clothes worn and patched up, her hair damp from the rain. She clutched a small plastic bag filled with what looked like second-hand books. Despite her obvious poverty, there was something striking about her. Eyes sparkled with sincerity, and her posture radiated a quiet confidence. "Can I help you?" Arthur asked, his tone clipped but polite. He wasn't used to pausing for anyone, let alone a child on the street. The girl hesitated for a moment, glancing nervously at the ground before looking back up at him. Then slowly she held out her hand. In it lay a delicate gold watch, its surface gleaming faintly even under the dim streetlight. "This fell from your wife's bag," she said softly, her voice steady despite her apparent nerves. "I saw her drop it earlier today." Arthur blinked, taken aback. Wife? He hadn't been married in years. In fact, he hadn't even dated anyone seriously since Eleanor. But this watch, it couldn't be hers, could it? For a brief second, his mind went blank. Then curiosity took over. He reached out and took the watch from the girl's palm. It was lighter than he expected, yet it carried a weight far heavier than its size suggested. Turning it over in his hands, Arthur examined it closely. The craftsmanship was exquisite, with intricate engravings winding around the edges. And then he saw the inscription on the back. Asterisk, "To my dearest Eleanor, always remember who you are." His breath caught in his throat. This wasn't just any watch. It belonged to someone he thought he'd left behind forever, Eleanor Whitaker, the woman who had once been the center of his universe. Arthur looked back at the girl, his expression unreadable. "Where did you find this?" he asked, his voice sharper than he intended. The girl flinched slightly but didn't back down. "Near the park," she replied quickly. "Earlier today, I saw a lady get into a taxi really fast. She must have dropped it. I picked it up because I thought maybe it was important." Important didn't begin to describe it. Arthur felt a strange mix of emotions bubbling inside him: confusion, anger, nostalgia, and something else he couldn't quite name. Who was this woman? Why did she have Eleanor's watch? And why did this poor girl go out of her way to return it? Before he could ask anything else, The girl spoke again, her voice tinged with worry. "I don't want any trouble," she said, clutching her bag tighter. "I just wanted to do the right thing." Arthur softened slightly at her words. There was no malice in her actions, only honesty. He reached into his wallet and pulled out a few bills, holding them out to her. "Here," he said gently. "Take this. You deserve it." The girl hesitated, eyeing the money warily. "I didn't do it for this," she murmured, shaking her head. "I just thought, if it meant something to someone." Her words trailed off, but Arthur understood. This wasn't about money for her. It was about doing what was right. Something about her innocence struck a chord deep within him, reminding him of a time when he too believed in simple truths and acts of kindness. Reluctantly, the girl accepted the money, stuffing it into her pocket without meeting his gaze. As she turned to leave, blending back into the sea of faces on the street, Arthur called out after her, "Wait, what's your name?" She glanced over her shoulder, her lips curling into a faint smile. "Clara," she said simply, before disappearing into the crowd. Standing there, clutching the watch in his hand, Arthur felt a strange sense of unease. This encounter was no coincidence. Somehow, fate had intervened, bringing him face to face with a piece of his past he thought he'd buried long ago. Little did he know, this was only the beginning of a journey that would change his life forever. Arthur stood motionless on the rain-slicked street, the watch still clutched tightly in his hand. The city buzzed around him, cars honking, people chatting, vendors shouting, but it all felt distant, like a movie playing in the background. His mind was elsewhere, racing through memories he had locked away years ago. Eleanor Whitaker. Just hearing her name whispered inside his head stirred emotions he thought were long dead. She had been the light in his darkest days, the one person who believed in him when no one else did. And then, just as suddenly as she had entered his life, she vanished without a trace. The watch in his palm wasn't just an object. It was a key to a door he thought was sealed shut forever. How could it have ended up in the hands of a stranger? Who was this woman Clara mentioned? Why did she have something so personal, so deeply tied to Arthur's past? Questions swirled in his mind, each one pulling him further into a vortex of confusion and longing. For years he had convinced himself that moving on meant forgetting. But now, holding this small piece of Eleanor's world, he realized how wrong he had been. Back at his penthouse apartment, Arthur sat by the window, staring out at the glittering skyline. The city lights reflected off the glass, casting faint shadows across the room. He turned the watch over again and again, examining every detail. The engraving, "To my dearest Eleanor, always remember who you are," was unmistakable. It was a gift he had given her on their 3rd anniversary, a token of love and gratitude for standing by him during his toughest times. At the time, he never imagined those words would come back to haunt him. Determined to find answers, Arthur made a decision. He couldn't let this mystery linger. If Eleanor was somehow connected to this, he needed to know why. Picking up his phone, he dialed a number he hadn't used in years, the private investigator who had helped him uncover secrets about rival companies in the past. When the man answered, Arthur got straight to the point. "I need your help," he said, his voice firm but tinged with urgency. "There's a woman I want you to find. Her name is Eleanor Whitaker." The investigator didn't ask questions. He knew better than to pry into Arthur's affairs. Instead, he promised to start immediately and keep Arthur updated. Hanging up, Arthur leaned back in his chair, exhaling deeply. He didn't know what he expected to find, or even if he wanted to face whatever truths lay ahead, but he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't ignore this anymore. Days stretched into weeks as Arthur waited anxiously for news. During that time, he found himself revisiting old memories, reliving moments he had tried so hard to forget. He remembered the first time he met Eleanor, a chance encounter at a bookstore where they both reached for the same novel. They laughed, struck up a conversation, and ended up spending hours talking about everything under the sun. From that day forward, they became inseparable. Eleanor was different from anyone else in Arthur's life. She saw beyond his ambition and drive, recognizing the vulnerability he hid beneath his tough exterior. With her, he felt safe, understood, truly himself. But their happiness was short-lived. One morning, Arthur woke up to find Eleanor gone. No note, no explanation, nothing. Just empty silence. He searched for her everywhere, called everyone he knew, but it was as if she had disappeared off the face of the earth. Eventually, he gave up, burying himself in work to numb the pain. Over time, he built his empire, becoming the powerful figure everyone admired or feared. Yet deep down, a part of him remained hollow, yearning for closure he never thought he'd get. Finally, the investigator called. Arthur picked up the phone, his heart pounding. "I found her," the man said simply. "She's alive." Alive. The word hit Arthur like a punch to the gut. Alive. After all these years, she was still out there, somewhere. According to the investigator, Eleanor was living quietly in a small town hours away, working as a librarian. She had changed her last name and kept a low profile, avoiding attention. But there was more. Much more. "She has a daughter," the investigator continued, his tone cautious. "A girl born shortly after she left you. Based on the timeline, there's a strong possibility." Arthur didn't need him to finish the sentence. The implication was clear. If Eleanor had a child not long after leaving, it meant the girl could be his, theirs, a daughter. The realization sent a jolt through Arthur's body. All these years, he had assumed he was alone in the world, unmoored from family or connection. And now, he might have a child, a living, breathing reminder of the love he once shared with Eleanor. The investigator sent over photos and additional details. Arthur stared at the picture of Eleanor, taken recently outside the library where she worked. She looked older, of course, her youthful vibrance tempered by time, but her essence remained unchanged. There was kindness in her eyes, wisdom etched into her smile. Looking at her brought back a flood of emotions Arthur didn't know how to handle. Then there was the photo of the girl, their supposed daughter. She looked to be in her early teens with soft features and bright, intelligent eyes. Arthur noticed traces of Eleanor in her face, but also glimpses of himself. The shape of her jaw, the curve of her nose, it was uncanny. Could it really be possible? Had Eleanor kept this secret from him all these years? As the initial shock wore off, Arthur began to feel anger bubbling beneath the surface. How could she do this? How could she raise his child without telling him? Didn't he deserve to know? He replayed their final days together in his mind, searching for clues he might have missed. Was there something in her behavior, some sign, that she was hiding something monumental? But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't piece it together. Whatever her reasons, she had chosen silence, leaving him to believe he was alone. Yet, as angry as he felt, another emotion crept in: hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, he could make things right. That he could meet this girl, this potential daughter, and build a relationship with her. That he could reconnect with Eleanor, understand why she made the choices she did, and perhaps forgive her. It wouldn't be easy, but Arthur knew one thing for sure. He couldn't walk away now. Not when he was finally so close to finding the truth. With newfound resolve, Arthur packed a bag and prepared to leave for the small town where Eleanor lived. As he stepped out of his penthouse, the weight of the watch in his pocket reminded him of the journey ahead. It wouldn't be simple, and it certainly wouldn't be quick. But for the first time in years, Arthur felt alive, driven by something more than wealth or power. He was chasing answers, seeking connections, hoping to reclaim the pieces of his life he thought he'd lost forever. The drive to the small town felt longer than it actually was. Arthur sat behind the wheel of his sleek car, gripping it tightly as if trying to hold on to some semblance of control in a situation that felt anything but controlled. The city skyline faded into rolling hills, quiet roads, and open skies. It was a world so different from the one he knew, peaceful, unhurried, almost like stepping back in time. But Arthur's mind wasn't at peace. Every mile brought him closer to answers, but also closer to questions he wasn't sure he was ready to face. When he finally arrived, the town greeted him with its charm, a quaint main street lined with mom-and-pop shops, a park where kids played on swings, and an old library nestled between a bakery and a flower shop. It was the kind of place where people waved hello even to strangers, where life moved at a pace that seemed almost alien to someone like Arthur. He parked near the library, took a deep breath, and stepped out of the car. For a moment, he just stood there, taking it all in. This was Eleanor's world now, a far cry from the bustling metropolis she once called home. Walking into the library, Arthur felt a strange mix of nerves and anticipation. The air smelled faintly of paper and ink, and the sound of pages turning filled the space. His eyes scanned the room until they landed on her. There she was, Eleanor. She sat at a desk near the window, organizing books, her hair tied back in a simple ponytail. She looked up briefly, scanning the room absent-mindedly, and then their eyes met. Time seemed to stop. Arthur froze mid-step, his heart pounding in his chest. Eleanor's expression shifted instantly, from curiosity to shock, then to something softer, almost pained. She recognized him immediately, despite the years that had passed. For a few seconds, neither of them moved or spoke. Then, slowly, Arthur approached her. "Eleanor," he said softly, his voice trembling slightly. It was the first time he'd spoken her name aloud in decades, and it felt foreign yet achingly familiar. She blinked, clearly struggling to process what was happening. "Arthur?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Her hands gripped the edge of the desk as if bracing herself. What are you doing here?" Arthur hesitated, unsure of how to begin. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the watch, the same watch that had set this entire journey in motion. Holding it out to her, he said simply, "This belongs to you." Eleanor stared at the watch, her eyes widening in recognition. Her fingers trembled as she reached for it, brushing against Arthur's hand briefly before pulling it away. She turned it over in her hands, tracing the engraving with her thumb. When she finally looked up at him, tears glistened in her eyes. "I can explain," she said quickly, her voice cracking under the weight of emotion. "But not here, not now." Arthur nodded, understanding the need for privacy. They agreed to meet later that evening at a small cafe down the street. As he walked away, Arthur couldn't shake the image of Eleanor sitting there, holding the watch like it was a lifeline to a past she thought she'd left behind. That evening, the cafe was warm and cozy, lit by soft yellow lights. Arthur arrived first, choosing a corner table where they could talk without interruptions. When Eleanor walked in, she looked different, not just older, but changed. There was a quiet strength about her, a resilience that hadn't been there when they were younger. She slid into the seat across from him, clutching a cup of tea like it might steady her shaking hands. For a while, neither of them spoke. Finally, Eleanor broke the silence. "I don't know where to start," she admitted, her voice heavy with guilt. "So much has happened since we last saw each other." "Start with why you left," Arthur said bluntly, his tone sharper than he intended. He softened quickly, adding, "Please, I need to understand." Eleanor sighed deeply, staring into her tea as if searching for the right words. "When I left, I didn't do it because I stopped loving you, she began. It was the opposite, really. I loved you too much to burden you with what I was going through. What were you going through? Arthur pressed gently. Eleanor hesitated, then continued. I found out I was pregnant shortly after we celebrated our anniversary. At first, I was terrified, scared of how you'd react, scared of whether you were ready for that kind of responsibility. You were building your empire, working day and night, and I didn't want to distract you from your dreams. So I convinced myself it was better this way. Better for me to leave, to give us both a chance to grow separately. Arthur listened intently, his jaw tightening as pieces of the puzzle began falling into place. You could have told me, he said quietly, though not accusingly. We could have figured it out together. I know that now, Eleanor replied, her voice thick with regret. But back then, I was young and scared. I thought I was making the right choice for both of us. And Clara? Arthur asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Hearing the name aloud sent a shiver down his spine. Eleanor nodded, tears streaming down her face. She's ours, she confirmed. Our daughter. I raised her the best I could, teaching her everything I thought was important: kindness, humility, hard work. But I never told her about you. I wanted to protect her, shield her from the pain of knowing she had a father who didn't know she existed. Arthur leaned back in his chair, overwhelmed by the weight of her confession. A part of him felt angry at Eleanor for keeping such a monumental secret, angry at himself for not seeing the signs earlier. But another part of him felt a profound sadness. All these years he had believed he was alone. And now he discovered he had a family, a daughter who was out there somewhere, unaware of who he was. I want to meet her, Arthur said firmly. Clara, I need to meet her. Eleanor hesitated, clearly torn. She's protective of me, she explained. She doesn't trust easily, especially when it comes to people with money. Growing up, I made sure she understood the value of simplicity, of earning things through hard work. Seeing you suddenly appear in her life, it might be overwhelming for her. I'll take it slow, Arthur promised. I won't push her. I need to try. Eleanor studied him for a long moment, as if weighing his sincerity. Finally, she nodded. All right, she said softly, but let me prepare her first. Let me tell her about you in my own way. If she agrees to see you, I'll arrange it. Relief washed over Arthur, followed by a wave of gratitude. Thank you, he said earnestly, for telling me the truth, for giving me a chance. Eleanor smiled faintly, though it was tinged with sadness. We have a lot to figure out, she said. But maybe it's not too late to make things right. As they parted ways that night, Arthur felt a glimmer of hope he hadn't felt in years. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, he knew that, but for the first time, he allowed himself to believe that healing was possible. That forgiveness, connection, and love weren't lost causes. That somewhere out there was a girl who carried a piece of him inside her, waiting to be discovered. Meeting Clara for the first time was one of the most nerve-wracking moments of Arthur's life. He had spent decades building multi-million-dollar deals, negotiating with the toughest businessmen in the world, and commanding boardrooms filled with high-powered executives. But none of that prepared him for sitting across from a teenage girl who didn't know where trust-him. Eleanor had arranged the meeting carefully, choosing a neutral spot, the local park where Clara often spent her afternoons reading or sketching. Arthur arrived early, pacing nervously under the shade of an old oak tree. His hands were sweaty, his mind racing with questions. What would she think of him? Would she hate him? Or worse, would she dismiss him entirely? When Clara finally appeared, walking toward him with a book tucked under her arm, Arthur felt his breath catch. She looked so much like Eleanor, her smile, the way she tilted her head, but there were unmistakable traces of himself, too. Her sharp jawline, the intensity in her eyes, it was as if someone had taken pieces of both of them and crafted this. Remarkable young woman. Clara stopped a few feet away, eyeing him cautiously. "You're him?" she asked bluntly, her tone guarded but curious. Arthur nodded, forcing a small, awkward smile. "Yes, I'm your father." The word sounded strange even to his own ears. Father. It wasn't a role he'd ever imagined playing, especially not now, at this stage of his life. But here he was, standing face to face with the daughter he never knew existed. Clara crossed her arms over her chest, clearly skeptical. "Why are you here?" she asked, her voice firm despite her youth. "Mom said you didn't know about me until recently. So why show up now?" Arthur hesitated, unsure how much honesty was too much. He decided to keep it simple. "Because I want to get to know you," he said sincerely. "I've missed out on so much already. I don't want to miss any more." Clara studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, without another word, she turned and walked over to a nearby bench, sitting down with her book still clutched tightly in her hands. Arthur followed, taking a seat beside her but leaving enough space to respect her boundaries. For a while, neither of them spoke. Clara flipped through the pages of her book absent-mindedly, while Arthur struggled to find the right words. Finally, she broke the silence. "What do you do?" she asked, glancing at him briefly before returning her gaze. "To the book. I run a company," Arthur replied, choosing his words carefully. "We make software that helps businesses operate more efficiently." Clara raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. "Sounds boring," Arthur chuckled despite himself. "It is sometimes. But it pays the bills." She smirked faintly, though. It disappeared almost as quickly as it came. "Do you think money makes people happy?" she asked suddenly, her tone sharper this time. Arthur blinked, caught off guard by the question. "No," he admitted after a pause, "not really. At least, not for me." Clara nodded, seemingly satisfied with his answer for now. Over the next hour they talked haltingly, their conversation punctuated by long silences and cautious exchanges. Arthur learned that Clara loved books, particularly stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things. She dreamed of becoming a writer someday, though she hadn't told many people about it. She also worked part-time at the library, helping her mom organize shelves and assist patrons. In turn, Arthur shared bits and pieces of his own life, not the glamorous parts, but the struggles, the sacrifices, and the loneliness that came with chasing success. He didn't sugarcoat anything. He wanted Clara to see him as human, flawed, and real. As the sun began to set, casting golden hues across the park, Clara finally softened slightly. "You seem okay," she said reluctantly. "But I need time to figure this out. You can't just walk into my life and expect everything to be fine overnight." Arthur nodded, understanding completely. "I wouldn't dream of it," he said honestly. "Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere." Over the weeks that followed, Arthur made a conscious effort to build a relationship with Clara. He visited the town regularly, always making sure to check in with Eleanor beforehand to ensure he wasn't overstepping. At first, Clara remained distant, testing him with tough questions and occasional sarcasm. But Arthur didn't let it discourage him. Instead, he listened, really listened, to what she had to say. He encouraged her passions, offering to buy her writing supplies and enrolling her in workshops led by published authors. Slowly, Clara began to open up, sharing snippets of her dreams and fears. One day, during one of their outings, Clara surprised him by asking, "Do you regret not being around when I was little?" Arthur paused, considering the question deeply. "Yes," he said finally, "more than I can put into words. But I also believe it's never too late to start again, to try, and make things better." Clara looked at him thoughtfully, then nodded. "Okay," she said simply. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was progress. Meanwhile, Arthur's relationship with Eleanor evolved as well. They spent hours talking late into the night, revisiting old memories and discussing the future. There were moments of tension. Of course, old wounds don't heal overnight, but there was also laughter, understanding, and a growing sense of partnership. Eleanor admired Arthur's willingness to change, to prioritize family over work for once. And Arthur found solace in Eleanor's unwavering kindness, the same quality that had drawn him to her all those years ago. Yet challenges remained. Clara still grappled with feelings of betrayal toward her mother for keeping such a huge secret. "Why didn't you tell me?" she demanded one evening, tears streaming down her face. "Did you think I wouldn't understand?" Eleanor hugged her tightly, rocking her back and forth like she used to when Clara was a child. "I was scared," Eleanor confessed. "Scared of losing you, scared of ruining the life we built together. I thought I was protecting you." "It's not fair," Clara sobbed. "You should have trusted me." "I know," Eleanor whispered, "and I'm sorry. More sorry than you'll ever know." Arthur watched silently from the doorway, his heart breaking for both of them. He wanted to step in, to offer comfort, but he knew this was something they needed to work through on their own. Despite these hurdles, the three of them continued to grow closer. Arthur stepped back from his demanding schedule, delegating responsibilities at work so he could focus on rebuilding his personal life. He started volunteering at the library, helping Eleanor and Clara with community events. Together, they established scholarships for local students and launched programs aimed at supporting struggling families. Through it all, Arthur realized something profound. Success wasn't measured by wealth or power, but by the connections you nurtured and the lives you touched. For the first time in years, he felt truly alive, not because of what he owned, but because of the people he loved. By the end of the year, Clara had written her first short story, a tale inspired by her journey of discovering her roots. When it won second place in a national writing competition, Arthur couldn't have been prouder. Standing beside her at the award ceremony, he felt a swell of pride and gratitude. This was his family, not perfect, not without scars, but real and beautiful in its imperfection. As they drove home together that night, Clara glanced at him and smiled. "Thanks for sticking around," she said softly. "Most people wouldn't have bothered." Arthur reached over and squeezed her hand. "You're worth it," he replied simply. And for the first time in a long time, he meant every word. Years passed, and the once fragile bond between Arthur, Eleanor, and Clara grew stronger with each passing day. What started as tentative steps toward reconciliation blossomed into a deep, unshakable connection. Arthur had transformed in ways he never thought possible, shedding the cold, calculating persona that had defined him for decades and embracing a life filled with warmth, vulnerability, and purpose. He wasn't just a father or a former lover. He was becoming part of something bigger than himself, a family. Clara, now in her late teens, had grown into a confident young woman with dreams that stretched far beyond the small town where she'd grown up. Her passion for writing flourished under Arthur's encouragement and support. He bought her books by her favorite authors, introduced her to mentors who believed in her talent, and even surprised her with a typewriter one Christmas, saying, "Every great writer needs their own voice." It became her prized possession, sitting proudly on her desk as she typed out stories late into the night. Her first novel, inspired by her journey of discovering her roots and navigating the complexities of family, became a bestseller. Critics praised its raw honesty and emotional depth, calling it a testament to resilience and the power of love. At the book launch, Clara stood nervously at the podium, scanning the crowd until her eyes landed on Arthur and Eleanor. They were sitting side by side, smiling proudly, their hands intertwined. She took a deep breath and began to speak. "This book wouldn't exist without two very important people," she said, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. "My mom, who taught me how to dream big while staying grounded, and my dad, who showed up when I least expected it and proved that it's never too late to start over." The audience erupted into applause, but Arthur barely heard it. His eyes welled up with tears as he watched his daughter, the girl he once didn't know existed, shine like the star she was always meant to be. For so long, he had chased success in boardrooms and balance sheets, believing wealth was the ultimate measure of achievement. But standing there, surrounded by love and pride, he realized true success wasn't about what you accumulated, it was about the lives you touched and the legacy you left behind. Eleanor, too, found new meaning in her life. After years of living quietly and keeping her past hidden, she embraced the opportunity to reconnect not only with Arthur, but also with herself. She rediscovered her love for art, painting landscapes that captured the beauty of their small town. Her work caught the attention of a local gallery, which offered to showcase her pieces. On opening night, Arthur and Clara stood beside her, beaming with pride as strangers admired her paintings. "You're amazing," Arthur whispered to her later that evening as they walked home together. "I always knew you were talented, but seeing this, it's incredible." Eleanor smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "Thank you for reminding me who I am," she said softly, "for helping me remember." Their relationship remained complicated. They chose not to remarry, valuing the friendship and partnership they had rebuilt, but it was built on a foundation of trust, forgiveness, and mutual respect. They weren't the same people they had been in their 20s, and that was okay. They had grown separately, endured hardships apart, and come back together stronger because of it. As for Arthur, stepping away from the corporate world allowed him to focus on what truly mattered. He handed over the reins of his company to capable hands, entrusting them to carry forward the vision he had worked so hard to build. Free from the relentless demands of business, he dedicated himself to giving back to communities like the one where Clara had grown up. Together, the family established scholarships for aspiring writers, artists, and entrepreneurs, ensuring that others had opportunities they might not otherwise have access to. One summer afternoon, the three of them gathered for a picnic in the park, the same park where Arthur and Clara had first met. The air was warm, carrying the scent of blooming flowers and freshly cut grass. Children laughed nearby, chasing each other around the playground, while birds chirped melodiously in the trees above. It was a perfect day. Clara sat cross-legged on the blanket, flipping through a worn copy of her novel. She glanced up at Arthur and grinned mischievously. "You know," she said, closing the book with a flourish, "it's funny how something as small as a watch brought us all together." Arthur chuckled, glancing at Eleanor, who nodded in agreement. That tiny gold timepiece had indeed set off a chain reaction, unraveling secrets, mending broken ties, and forging a future none of them could have imagined. It served as a reminder that life has a way of bringing people full circle, often when they least expect it. "I guess some things are just meant to happen," Eleanor added, her voice tinged with nostalgia, "even if it takes years or decades for them to fall into place." Arthur reached out and took her hand, then turned to Clara, placing his other hand on her shoulder. "No matter how messy or painful the journey is," he said, his voice steady and sincere, "it's worth it in the end. Because we found each other." Clara leaned into him, resting her head on his arm. "Yeah," she murmured, "we did." For a moment, none of them spoke. They simply sat there, basking in the quiet joy of being together. The scars of their past hadn't disappeared. They were still there, faint reminders of the struggles they had overcome, but they no longer defined them. Instead, they served as proof of their strength, their resilience, and their capacity to heal. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Arthur felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. He had spent most of his life chasing success, believing it would fill the void inside him. But now, surrounded by the people who mattered most, he understood that true fulfillment came from connection, from loving and being loved in return. And so, as the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, the three of them sat together, united not just by blood but by shared experiences, laughter, and tears. Their story wasn't perfect, but it was there as a testament to the power of second chances, forgiveness, and the enduring bonds of family.